Hello everyone, welcome back to What the Horror. I hope you're all really well. If you're new here and you like horror and you like movies, then don't forget to click that subscribe button, as I am here for you with movie reviews, rankings, deep dives and comparisons. So in my last Letterboxd recap, I said if you guys like me doing these What I Watched episodes, then I would continue to do them. And it turned out to be one of my most popular episodes, so here we are, doing it again. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about everything that I watched in the month of November. I'm also going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to change the structure of the episode a little bit, only because the last episode was quite a long one and it was a lot of editing. So I thought I would just try something a little bit different and see if it's better for you guys viewing and see if it's better for me editing. Instead of just going through the list in order of all the films that I watched, I am going to group the films together and I will add timestamps for those groups. I will also add individual timestamps for the movies because they may include spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film yet, you can just skip to the next timestamp. So I'll talk about the movies that I have rewatched first of all, and then secondly I will talk about the films that are a new watch for me but are non-horror, and then finally new watches for me that are in the horror genre. Then I'm adding a new part to this episode where I will pick out 2 films from the list, one of them that I highly recommend that you skip and one that I highly recommend that you check out. These will be my flop of the month and my hit of the month. One last note before we get going, some of these films I watched for research purposes, so I won't be talking in depth about those, but I will link to their individual episodes. Okay, so first off, let's talk about the movies that I rewatched this month, because you will come to know I am a sucker for a rewatch. It's a problem. So I rewatched both I Know What You Did Last Summer and I Still Know What You Did Last Summer for research for the episodes I did on that franchise, but I will add links to those episodes in the description box. Then in preparation, very excited preparation for the new Bond film No Time to Die, I rewatched all of the Daniel Craig James Bond films. And first up was Casino Royale, released in 2006. After receiving a license to kill, British Secret Service agent James Bond heads to Madagascar, where he uncovers a link to Lashif, a man who finances terrorist organisations. Learning that Lashif plans to raise money in a high-stakes poker game, MI6 sends Bond to play against him, gambling that their newest 00 operative will topple the man's organisation. So I grew up watching and loving the James Bond franchise, so I was very excited when Casino Royale was announced, and I was already a fan of Daniel Craig, so I was very excited to see what he would bring to the role. Casino Royale acts as a soft reboot and prequel to the previous films, and I think that this was a really smart choice creatively. It gave them the opportunity to bring Bond into the modern day and to shake up which elements of classic Bonds that they wanted to keep going forward. I think that Casino Royale gave us the most in-depth exploration of the character of James Bond that we'd seen to this point, which they then wonderfully expanded on in Skyfall later on. I don't know if you can hear that, but there is a storm blowing a gale outside, so if you hear the wind or rain battering against the window, I do apologise, but there's nothing I can really do about it. It's been like this all week. I loved and love how the Bonds we get in the beginning of this film is a world away from the Bond that we already knew from previous films. He's scruffy, he's less well tailored, and to quote another franchise, he's more hammer than scalpel. But by the end of the movie, I was ready for that end scene where Bond enters in his sharp suit and he's got his traditional 007 pose with his gun, and all the while the name's Bond, James Bond, is playing in the background. Beautiful. Then we come back down to earth with Quantum of Solace, released in 2008. Now, I don't hate Quantum of Solace, far from it. I gave it 3 stars on Letterboxd, and it is certainly not the worst Bond film we have ever got. But it was caught up in the early 2000s writer's strike, and I think it greatly suffers because of this. So Quantum of Solace acts as a direct sequel to Casino Royale, but the problem is it was never intended to be as much of a sequel as it ended up being. This was because the director and producer had to create the film based off of the bare bones of a script that Paul Haggis managed to finish 2 hours before the strike started. Daniel Craig does a great job in his portrayal as always, and with the editing they actually managed to create something quite wonderful that perfectly matches the erratic anger of Bond while he's on his revenge mission. Then I watched Skyfall, released in 2012. When James Bond's latest assignment goes terribly wrong, it leads to a calamitous turn of events. Undercover agents around the world are exposed and MI6 is attacked, forcing M to relocate the agency. With MI6 now compromised inside and out, M turns to the one man she can trust, James Bond. But lurking in the shadows is a man from M's past who wants to settle an old score. So in my opinion, Skyfall is quite possibly the greatest James Bond film we have ever had. I would have to rewatch Goldfinger and Thunderball to be 100% sure on that, as it's been a while, but either way it is definitely in my top 10 movies of all time, and it is just a masterpiece of cinema. It is the perfect blend of action done well and nostalgic nods to classic James Bond films, and for someone like myself who laps up nostalgia, I was almost drooling by the end of this film with that end scene. The soundtrack and cinematography to Skyfall are pure perfection. I mean, the setting of Skyfall up in Scotland is absolutely stunning, and this has hands down the best opening credit scenes of any James Bond film. And then there's that scene towards the beginning of the film where Bond adjusts his shirt cuffs after just managing to land safely into a carriage after the back half of the train was ripped away. It's just wonderful. I mean, I could go on and on picking out perfect little parts of this film, but I won't. Half of you have probably clicked off already. Then finally, for Daniel Craig Bond films in the month of November, I watched Spectre, released in 2015. No, unfortunately I didn't actually get round to watching No Time to Die in the month of November, but I fully intend to watch it in December. Now, I want to address something about Spectre that really irritates me, and it's probably just me and maybe nobody else, but it's the fact that you don't seem to be able to read a review about this film without reading the phrase, "not as good as Skyfall." Well, it's not Skyfall. No, it's not Skyfall, it's Spectre. Now, before you say it, I know we all do it. We all assess and review the movies that we watch. I mean, I'm doing it as a job. I'm doing it right now. But the problem is, if we're going to compare a film to its predecessors or sequels, we have to be careful not to fall into the trap to write a film off completely just because it isn't exactly the same as one that came before it. Spectre is its own movie, and while we may compare it to other installments, I think it should really be assessed on its own merits. And as the fourth film in Daniel Craig's little series of James Bond films, it's really not that bad. I gave it 3.5 stars on Letterboxd, and I definitely enjoyed Spectre more than I enjoyed Quantum of Solace. And might I just interject with a little information here, something to create perhaps a little perspective for those Spectre naysayers. Let's remind ourselves that Roger Moore's fourth Bond film was Moonraker, and Pierce Brosnan's fourth Bond film was Die Another Day. Spectre sees the appearance of Bond's oldest nemesis, Ernst Blofeld, and the organisation Spectre, and it has some incredible action sequences and lots of great moments from Q, who in this film is given much more screen time, which is definitely a good thing. Okay, moving on from fangirling over James Bond, another rewatch last month for me was Knives Out, released in 2019. The circumstances surrounding the death of crime novelist Harlan Thrombey are mysterious, but there's one thing that renowned detective Benoit Blanc knows for sure. Everyone in the wildly dysfunctional Thrombey family is a suspect. Now Blanc must sift through a web of lies and red herrings to uncover the truth.
CSI KFC?
Now, the fact that Daniel Craig is in this movie has nothing to do with the fact that I love it. Nothing. You suspicious little kitties, you. So Knives Out is a yearly rewatch for me, especially in the autumn and winter months, and it has been since it was released. I am a huge fan of Agatha Christie style whodunit. You know the type. Big country house, lots of guests, someone's murdered and a sleuth has to sniff out who did it. There are a lot of wannabe Agatha Christie mysteries out there that just don't have the same heart and intelligence that her stories have. But Knives Out is not one of those movies. It is a very smart movie with a strong, tight script and well fleshed out characters and a genuinely good reveal / twist at the end. There are so many hidden clues and details within every single scene that with every rewatch I'm noticing something new that I didn't previously see, and I love how the film tells the audience what the characters are like by showing us and not telling us. In fact, it even goes so far as to have the characters tell the audience and the investigating police who they are, what types of people they are. But then we actually see who they really are through their actions. It is very cleverly done. So the set dressing in Knives Out is... the interiors of the Thrombey house are wonderful. And as an Agatha Christie fan, you did know as an Agatha Christie fan, right? I wasn't too subtle with that. I loved all the nods to her stories through little props around the sets, like the doll's house, or just little comments that the characters make. Plus, what is there not to love about Mr. Clean-Cut himself, Captain America, repeatedly saying, "Eat shit." And my final rewatch for the month of November was Fear Street 1994, released earlier this year in 2021. After a series of brutal slayings, a teen and her friends take on an evil force that's plagued their notorious town for centuries. So I'm sure most of you are already aware of the Fear Street movies. They were originally due for a theatrical release in June 2020, but because of world events, this was scrapped and the movie rights were sold to Netflix, who then released them on a weekly basis in July of 2021. So Fear Street 1994 is the first part in the trilogy, and in my opinion, it's the weakest of the three movies. I'm not the biggest fan as Dina as the leading lady, so with her holding up most of the movie, it just took away some of the enjoyment for me. But I will say that I think that Kate and Simon are really good supporting characters. It does a really good job of recreating the feel of the 90s, and I thought that the opening scene was the perfect love letter to the 90s slasher Scream, which is a huge influence in the 1994 installment. I have heard criticism of the soundtrack for this film because some of the songs used were not released until after 1994, but for me personally I don't feel like it matters that much because I still think that the songs used create a sense of the times. Overall, despite a few flaws, for me, I think that Fear Street 1994 is a good film. I gave it 3 stars on Letterboxd, and it does a really good job of establishing the characters and the storyline that is then going to continue on through into 1978 and 1666. Like I said, not my favourite of the trilogy, but it is still one of the nicest surprises we had this year in the horror community. So this month I watched a total of 10 new movies, which I think is pretty good for me because, as I said earlier, I'm a bit of a bugger for a rewatch. When I say new movies, I mean a mixture of new releases and films that are just a new watch for me personally. So first we'll cover the non-horrors that are new watches for me. First up, I watched The Guilty, starring Jake Gyllenhaal and released on Netflix earlier this year in 2021. A troubled police detective demoted to 911 operator, duty scrambles to save a distressed caller during a harrowing day of revelations and reckonings. This movie, not for me. I gave it 2.5 stars on Letterboxd, but that is only because Mr. Gyllenhaal acts his butt off the entire movie. This was a very tense movie with some pretty heavy subject matter, and there were some scenes that started triggering my anxiety, and I found it quite a difficult film to watch overall. But credit where credit is due, and like I said earlier, Jake Gyllenhaal's acting in this is so strong. I mean, the man's back must be broken from carrying this movie on his shoulders for the entire time. But also another point I thought they did quite well was keeping the audience engaged in what was happening, considering that the entire film takes place in one room and we only visually see maybe 2 or 3 different people and then hear a couple more as well. So I actually went back to the cinema last month for the first time since February 2020 when I went to see The Invisible Man, and this time I went to see The Eternals. The Eternals, a race of immortal beings with superhuman powers who have secretly lived on Earth for thousands of years, reunite to battle the evil deviants. I am a huge nerdy Marvel fangirl. And since Endgame came out, I have been sat here twiddling my thumbs, not knowing what to do with myself. Bless 2021. It has been like Christmas all year round. We have had the TV series WandaVision, Loki, and my favourite, The Falcon and My Boy the Winter Soldier, and we have had Black Widow, Eternals, Shang-Chi, and not to mention Spider-Man No Way Home, which sadly I am yet to see. We are now well and truly established in Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Eternals acts as an introductory film to, well, the Eternals. It acts a bit like Guardians of the Galaxy. So Eternals is a visually beautiful movie, and as a fan of history, I appreciated all of the different parts of the film that were set in different historical periods. But I'm not sure I was 100% on board with the whole, if you've been here the whole time, why did you sit back and let all these atrocities happen? Because they had to make their own mistakes and learn from it approach of the film. That just didn't really work for me. I feel like it's a bit hokey. We need a bit more Eternals. It was funny, however, watching both Robb Stark and Jon Snow repeatedly go gooey-eyed over a character named Cersei. That was not lost on this Game of Thrones fan. I also think it's fantastic that there was a superhero representing the LGBTQ community. That's really exciting. And talking of exciting, let's just take a moment for that mid-credit scene. Yes, Marvel, that is how you do it. I'm not going to say what it was or who it was if you haven't seen it yet, but suffice to say, I'm very excited. I also watched The Green Knight, released earlier this year in 2021. King Arthur's headstrong nephew embarks on a daring quest to confront the Green Knight, a mysterious giant who appears at Camelot. Risking his head, he sets off on an epic adventure to prove himself before his family and court. So The Green Knight is actually my first A24 movie. I'm getting all bougie. I understand that A24 movies are not for everybody. They're very arty and very dense in layers, but I absolutely loved The Green Knight. It felt like I was just watching a piece of art. It is unbelievably beautiful. The colours in it. My OLED 4K TV definitely allowed me the luxury of viewing this film the way it was intended to be viewed. I will say that you will be helped going into this film having a basic understanding of medieval England or Arthurian legends. It's not essential by any stretch of the imagination, but 100%, if you do, it will add another level of understanding of the movie. I loved some of the characters in this film. I thought the fox was far too cute, and Sean Harris's portrayal of Arthur, I really bought why his Knights of the Round Table would be so loyal to him. And we also have Barry Keoghan, I do apologise for the pronunciation, popping over from Eternals as the Scavenger, and the Scavenger definitely gave me Ramsay vibes from Game of Thrones, especially Ramsay's very early scenes, which were a huge source of amusement for me. Overall, The Green Knight is an experience for the attentive viewer as we follow Gawain on his quest for honour, and also it could be kind of classed as a Christmas movie, so it's kind of perfect to pop on this month of December. And finally, for my non-horror, I watched Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, released earlier this year in 2021. Martial arts master Shang-Chi confronts the past he thought he left behind when he's drawn into the web of the mysterious Ten Rings organisation. Yes, another Marvel movie, but I think I enjoyed this one just a smidge more than Eternals. I really loved all the martial arts that were incredibly choreographed. I loved the mythical creatures that they created, and the stunning visuals really reminded me of Chinese films like House of Flying Dagger. There was for me two characters that stole the entire film, but I'm not going to get into who that was because it would be a spoiler. You know what? No, I am going to get into who that was. So if you haven't seen the film yet, you might want to skip ahead to the next one. About 2/3 into the movie, we meet Trevor Slattery, who's played by Ben Kingsley. Now, in Iron Man 3, Trevor was a character who was actually paid to play the villain, the Mandarin. So we're linking nicely back to Phase 2 there, I think. But in this film, he's just Trevor, the British actor who is a proud Liverpool football supporter and basically doesn't really know what's fully going on most of the time, and him and his little creature sidekick absolutely stole any scene that they were in. They had genuine laugh out loud moments. Okay, finally, the section you guys have all been waiting for, my horror new watches of the month of November. Now, like I said earlier, I think I said it, but if I didn't, I'm saying it now. New watches means a mixture of both new releases and just new watches for me personally. So the first new horror I watched this month was Malignant, released earlier this year in 2021. I have done a standalone episode on that film, however, so I'm not going to talk about it here. If you want to know my thoughts on that movie, I'm going to direct you over to that episode. But if you want a little sneak peek of my opinions and thoughts of that film, I absolutely loved Malignant. It is everything I never knew I wanted in a movie. I then watched Don't Tell a Soul, also released earlier this year in 2021. A security officer falls down a hidden well while chasing two teenage brothers who stole more than $12,000. Desperate to get out, he soon tries to convince one of the siblings to set him free and save his life. So Don't Tell a Soul stars Rainn Wilson, Jack Dylan Grazer and Fionn Whitehead, and has been on my to-watch list for quite a while now. I am a big fan of both Rainn Wilson and Jack Dylan Grazer, so I was really looking forward to checking this one out. It wasn't exactly what I expected, but like I said in my Letterboxd review, I don't actually know what I was expecting, but just not that. It had a much darker tone than I expected it to, but the story is a really interesting concept, and I think that the screenplay really gave all of the actors a chance to really show off their acting range. Wilson and Grazer in particular, the scenes of just them two together were by far my favourites of the movie. Now I know not everyone would class Don't Tell a Soul as a horror, and maybe it is more of a thriller, but I personally class it as a horror, at least a soft horror. Now I don't want to say too much more about this film or include spoilers, because this is definitely a film you want to go into really just not knowing much about it past the basic premise. I also watched I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer for the first time last month, but if you have seen my ranking episode on that franchise, then you will already know my thoughts on that movie, and I no longer have to waste any time on that steaming pile of Now I love a creature feature, especially a shark movie, so I checked out Great White, released earlier this year in 2021. When a seaplane is destroyed in a freak accident, 5 people find themselves drifting on a raft. At the mercy of the tide and with no hope of rescue, the helpless situation takes a horrifying turn when they are terrorised by a ravenous great white. So, I feel like I'm a bit of a hypocrite. Yes, I love a shark movie, but I am also acutely aware of the irresponsible portrayal of sharks that these movies give the audience. In my Letterboxd review for Great White, I said, the problem with these movies is that they're irresponsible in their representation of sharks. It's more forgivable with Jaws, but in 2021 we know enough about these creatures to know that they do not open metal doors of sunken ships to chase blonde women. But seriously, Jaws is one of my favourite movies, one of my top 5 favourite films, but you know, I am aware that this film created a lot of people's fear of sharks, a lot of people's fear of the ocean, and back in the 70s we didn't know anywhere near as much about these beautiful creatures as we know now. And I suppose it is the unknown that becomes the terrifying to us. I love how Peter Benchley, the author of Jaws, is now a huge advocate for shark protection. He partnered up with the organisation Wild Aid to call for immediate stop to shark finning. He understands the damage that his novel did, and he is trying to do some good work, you know, to balance that out, I suppose. Not all modern day shark movies are still portraying this stereotypical image of sharks. I thought that the recent release of The Meg did a pretty good job of balancing the horror of the creature feature while highlighting humans' treatment of sharks. They used a prehistoric extinct shark as the villain, but they also managed to pass comment on the cruelty of shark finning. Something to think about is that sharks kill approximately 12 humans a year, whilst humans kill around 100 million sharks a year. Okay, TED Talk over. As far as this shark movie goes, it's not bad. I did only give it 2 stars, but it's certainly not the worst shark movie I've ever seen. I think the Megalodon 3 might be the worst I've ever seen. There were some genuinely entertaining moments, but the main problem is it was predictable. It was really predictable, and also it had sharks opening doors of sunken ships, so I also watched Last Night in Soho, released earlier this year in 2021 and directed by Edgar Wright, one of my favourite directors of all time. I have done a standalone episode on Last Night in Soho, so if you want to know my thoughts on it, go and check that episode out. I will leave a link to it. I did think it was a 4.5-star film. I loved Last Night in Soho. It would have been a 5-star film for me, but there was one element of it that I really wasn't a fan of. But it wasn't a big enough negative to prevent me from obsessively thinking about this film, or obsessively listening to the soundtrack of this film, or from falling in love with the wonderful Anya Taylor-Joy. But let's be honest, how can you not fall in love with Anya Taylor-Joy? So my last new watch horror was Old, released earlier this year in 2021. A family take a relaxing tropical holiday but discover that the secluded beach where they are relaxing is somehow causing them to age rapidly, reducing their entire lives into a single day. Old seems to be a bit of a mixed bag for people. They either really like it or they don't, but I suppose it's not really that surprising considering it is an M. Night Shyamalan film and he's quite a divisive film director. I personally don't mind his work. I've not seen all the films that he has made, but I am a fan of the ones that I have seen, especially Signs and The Village. And I also enjoyed Old. I thought the setting was really lovely, although it was strange watching a film set on a tropical beach while in the early onsets of winter. The story is definitely an interesting concept, and I think that the reveal was quite good. You always have that traditional reveal and twist in an M. Night movie. I did kind of guess what the reveal was going to be, or at least 90% of the reveal, but that didn't take anything away from the film for me. So some of the movie's messages were not subtle and quite on the nose, especially when you have character dialogue basically shoving it in your face and ramming it down your throat. And talking of the characters, some of the acting left something to be desired, except for Thomasin McKenzie and Alex Wolff. They were good. Okay, on to the news section of my episode, my flop and hit of the month. So for the month of November, the flop of the month goes to I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer. Probably no surprise to any of you guys. I gave this film 0.5 star, and that's only because I felt bad about slating the movie. But yes, I would highly recommend you avoid this movie. And my hit of the month is, well, actually I'm cheating a little bit. I picked 2. And you're lucky I stuck with 2. There were a lot of strong movies in the month of November, but in the end I chose Skyfall and Last Night in Soho. I would highly recommend you check out these movies. So that is everything that I watched in the month of November. I will definitely be doing another one of these for December, but in that one we will have some TV shows, as I have started watching The Queen's Gambit and we are finally getting season 2 of The Witcher. Woo, very exciting. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by and listening to this Horror Fan's Thoughts. I appreciate each and every one of you. Take care of yourselves and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye guys. It is the perfect blend of modern day action done well and nostalgic nostalgic nads. Wow. It was funny, however, though, watching both Robb Stark and Jon Snow repeatedly go all gooey-eyed over a character named Cersei. Cersei? Cersei, the Yorkshire for Cersei.